In a stunning turn of events that sends shockwaves through every corner of Los Angeles and leaves the Forrester family reeling, Hope Logan's long-awaited wedding comes to a devastating halt after Brooke Logan reveals a terrible, deeply buried secret from Liam Spencer's past. A revelation so explosive that it forces Hope to question not only her future, but the very foundation of her love story. Because what begins as a day filled with soft music, glowing candles, and fragile optimism quickly transforms into an emotional battlefield where truths long hidden claw their way to the surface. And as Hope stands on the brink of saying I do, her mother's trembling voice cuts through the air with an urgency that cannot be ignored. Brooke's eyes filled with guilt, fear, and maternal desperation as she realizes that the secret she has protected for years can no longer remain buried. Not when her daughter is about to bind her life forever to a man whose past carries consequences that could destroy her happiness. And as guests whisper and Ridge senses something is terribly wrong, Brooke pulls Hope aside, her hand shaking as she confesses that Liam once made a decision so reckless, so morally compromising, that it threatens everything Hope believes about the man she loves, revealing that during one of Liam's darkest periods, when he was torn between Hope and Steffi and drowning in guilt and confusion, he became involved in a scandal that went far beyond emotional betrayal. One that involved manipulation, deception, and a secret agreement designed to protect himself at the expense of others, including a vulnerable young woman whose life was forever altered. And Brooke admits that she discovered the truth years ago, but stayed silent, convinced that exposing it would only cause pain and chaos. Yet now, watching Hope walk toward a future built on half-truths, Brooke cannot bear the weight of her silence any longer, and Hope listens in stunned disbelief as her mother explains that Liam once paid someone to keep quiet, not about an affair, but about his role in a situation that nearly destroyed a family. A secret that could resurface at any moment and bring public scandal, legal consequences, and emotional devastation. And as the gravity of Brooke's confession sinks in, Hope's world begins to fracture, her heart racing as she struggles to reconcile the Liam she knows with the man her mother is describing. Because this revelation is not just about a mistake. It is about character, about whether the man she plans to marry is truly capable of honesty and accountability. And when Hope confronts Liam, her voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and fury, he initially denies everything, insisting Brooke must be mistaken or exaggerating. But when pressed, when Hope demands the truth with tears streaming down her face, Liam finally breaks, his silence collapsing under the weight of his own guilt as he admits that Brooke is right, that he did something unforgivable in a moment of fear and desperation, believing he was protecting everyone involved, but in reality only protecting himself. And as he confesses, the church seems to close in around them, the guests sensing the tension, Steffi watching from a distance with narrowed eyes as pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. Because Steffi, too, remembers that time in Liam's life, remembers the chaos, the lies, the way he bounced between women while insisting he was trying to do the right thing. And now she realizes that there was more going on than she ever knew. And as Hope listens to Liam's confession, each word feels like a betrayal, not just because of what he did, but because of how easily he lived with the lie, how he looked into her eyes for years and never found the courage to tell her the truth. And in that moment, Hope understands that love without trust is an illusion, and that marriage built on secrets is destined to crumble. So with a strength born from heartbreak, she makes the agonizing decision to cancel the wedding, her voice steady even as her heart shatters, announcing that she cannot marry a man who kept such a life-altering secret from her, no matter how much she loves him. And the fallout is immediate and explosive. Brooke collapses into tears, torn between relief and guilt, knowing she did the right thing but hating that it cost her daughter so much pain. While Ridge struggles to support both Brooke and Hope, conflicted by his own complicated history with secrets and second chances, and Liam is left standing alone, devastated and desperate, realizing too late that his past has finally caught up with him. And as the guests slowly disperse, whispers spreading like wildfire, the scandal threatens to engulf everyone connected to it, because the secret Brooke revealed does not stay contained within that room. It leaks into the wider world, raising questions about Liam's integrity, his business dealings, and his suitability as a partner and a father. And as the days that follow unfold, Hope is forced to confront not only her broken engagement but her own identity, questioning whether she has been too forgiving, too willing to believe the best in someone who repeatedly failed to live up to his promises. And as she leans on her family, particularly Brooke and Donna, she begins to see that her strength has always come from knowing her worth, not from clinging to a relationship that causes her pain, while Liam spirals, haunted by regret, replaying every moment he could have chosen honesty, but didn't, and he seeks forgiveness. Not only from Hope, but from himself, though redemption seems impossibly out of reach, and Steffi, watching from the sidelines, finds herself caught between sympathy and vindication, because while she understands the complexity of Liam's choices, she also sees a pattern of indecision and self-interest that she can no longer ignore. And as tensions rise between the Logans and the Forresters, old wounds are reopened, accusations are hurled, and alliances are tested, with some blaming Brooke for revealing the secret at the worst possible moment, while others praise her courage for finally telling the truth. And through it all, Hope emerges transformed, her heartbreak forging a clarity she has never known before, as she realizes that canceling the wedding was not a failure, but an act of self-respect, a refusal to accept a future clouded by deception, and as Liam is forced to face the consequences of his actions, possibly including legal ramifications and public disgrace, the story serves as a haunting reminder that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of resurfacing, especially when love and loyalty are at stake. And as the dust begins to settle, new questions arise about whether forgiveness is possible, whether love can survive such a breach, and whether Liam will ever truly change. While Hope stands at a crossroads, her future uncertain but her resolve stronger than ever, determined to build a life grounded in honesty and self-worth, even if it means walking away from the man she once believed was her destiny. And as Brooke watches her daughter step into this new chapter, she carries the weight of her own choices, knowing that sometimes the most painful truths are the ones that set us free. And in the end, the canceled wedding becomes more than a shattered dream. It becomes a turning point that reshapes lives, exposes long-hidden truths, and proves that in the world of the bold and the beautiful, love is never simple, secrets are never safe, and the past always finds a way to demand its reckoning. As the aftermath of the canceled wedding continues to ripple outward, the emotional shockwaves grow deeper and more complex, transforming what was once a single devastating revelation into a prolonged reckoning that forces every character to confront uncomfortable truths about love, loyalty, and the cost of silence. Because in the days following Brooke's confession and Hope's painful decision, the atmosphere around Forrester Creations becomes heavy with tension, employees whispering in hallways, glances lingering just a moment too long, as Liam's name becomes synonymous with scandal and betrayal, and Hope, though outwardly composed, finds herself battling waves of grief that come without warning, moments when the future she envisions suddenly flashes before her eyes only to vanish again, leaving behind an ache that feels both raw and strangely clarifying. And as she retreats into herself, spending long hours reflecting on her past with Liam, she begins to see patterns she once ignored. Moments when doubts were smoothed over by apologies, when promises replaced real change, and this growing awareness becomes both painful and empowering, because with every realization, Hope understands that the secret Brooke revealed was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger truth about Liam's inability to fully face himself. And Brooke, meanwhile, struggles under the weight of her own role in the collapse, haunted by the knowledge that her silence allowed the deception to grow roots. Even as she reminds herself that telling the truth ultimately protected her daughter from a marriage built on lies, and her relationship with Hope enters a fragile new phase where gratitude and resentment coexist, unspoken but ever present, while Ridge finds himself caught in the middle once again, reflecting on his own long history of secrets and betrayals, recognizing painfully familiar mistakes in Liam's choices. And as he tries to counsel both Brooke and Hope, he realizes that this moment is forcing the entire family to confront generational patterns of dishonesty disguised as protection, and Liam, isolated and increasingly desperate, begins to unravel under the pressure, his attempts to explain himself falling flat as he discovers that remorse without accountability offers little comfort to those he hurt, and in quiet moments alone, he is forced to confront the truth that his greatest fear was never losing hope but being exposed as flawed and fallible, and that fear drove him to choices that ultimately guaranteed the very outcome he sought to avoid. And as the secret from his past continues to surface in fragments, drawing attention from lawyers and old acquaintances alike, the threat of real consequences becomes impossible to ignore, pushing Liam to consider whether redemption is even possible or whether his mistakes have finally closed the door on the life he wanted. And Steffi, observing the fallout with a mix of sadness and resolve, feels a shift within herself as well. Because while part of her empathizes with Liam's struggle, another part recognizes that his pattern of avoidance and emotional instability has cost too many people too much, and this realization strengthens her determination to protect her own heart and her family from further chaos. Even as she grapples with unresolved feelings that refuse to disappear entirely, and as tensions between the Logans and the Forresters escalate, old arguments resurface with renewed intensity. Accusations flying about who knew what and when, who should have spoken sooner, and whether Brooke's timing was an act of courage or cruelty. And these conflicts force everyone to examine their own complicity in a culture of secrecy that has long been normalized in the name of love. And through it all, Hope gradually emerges as the emotional center of the storm, her quiet strength commanding respect as she refuses to be defined by heartbreak, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding her sense of self, throwing herself into her work, her values, and her belief that love should be rooted in transparency rather than sacrifice. And as she begins to speak more openly about her decision, articulating the reason she could not move forward with the wedding, she becomes a symbol of self-respect for those around her, inspiring difficult conversations and unexpected shifts in perspective. And Liam, watching Hope from a distance, realizes that the woman he loves has grown in ways he may no longer be able to reach. And this realization cuts deeper than any public condemnation, because it forces him to accept that forgiveness cannot be demanded or rushed. It must be earned, if it can be earned at all. And as the weeks pass, the secret that once seemed safely buried reveals its full scope, connecting to past events in ways that challenge long-held narratives and threaten to rewrite personal histories, leaving no one untouched. And Brooke, seeking some measure of peace, confronts her own fear of abandonment and her tendency to protect those she loves at the expense of truth, vowing to break the cycle even when it costs her emotionally. While Ridge, faced with the mirror this crisis holds up to his own life, begins to question whether the second chances he so readily grants are acts of compassion or avoidance. And as each character wrestles with these internal conflicts, the story shifts from one of scandal to one of transformation, illustrating that the most profound consequences of secrets are not always immediate, but unfold slowly, reshaping identities and relationships over time. And for Hope, the canceled wedding becomes not an ending, but a beginning, a painful yet necessary step toward a future defined by choice rather than compromise. And as she looks ahead, uncertain but resolute, she understands that love, when it comes again, must be built on honesty strong enough to withstand the weight of the past, because in the world she inhabits, where passion and betrayal often walk hand in hand, truth remains the only foundation that can endure. And as Liam stands at his own crossroads, stripped of illusions and forced to confront the man he has been, the path forward remains unclear. But one thing is certain, the secret that shattered a wedding has irrevocably changed every life it touched, leaving behind a legacy that will echo through future choices, future loves, and future betrayals, ensuring that the reckoning Brooke set in motion will continue to shape destinies long after the tears have dried and the whispers have faded, proving once again that in the bold and the beautiful, the truth may arrive late, but when it does, it changes everything. As time continues to move forward after the wedding's collapse, the emotional consequences deepen rather than fade, revealing that the true impact of Brooke's revelation and Hope's decision is not confined to a single scandal, but unfolds slowly, reshaping lives in ways both subtle and profound. Because Hope, though outwardly calm, begins to experience a quiet mourning for the version of herself who believed that love alone could overcome anything. And in private moments, she grieves not just the loss of Liam, but the future she imagined, the family she hoped to build, and the certainty she once felt. Yet within that grief there is also growth, as she recognizes that choosing herself was an act of courage she had been postponing for years. And this realization brings a sense of clarity that steadies her even on the hardest days, while Brooke, watching her daughter navigate this new reality, carries a complicated mix of pride and sorrow, aware that her honesty forced hope into pain, but also protected her from a lifetime of doubt. And Brooke's own journey becomes one of self-forgiveness as she confronts the pattern of shielding loved ones from consequences, learning that love without truth ultimately becomes another form of betrayal. And Ridge, increasingly reflective, finds himself reevaluating his role as both partner and father, seeing in Liam's downfall a warning about the cost of emotional shortcuts and unresolved guilt. And this introspection sparks conversations long overdue, challenging the family to consider whether their repeated cycles of secrecy are acts of love or simply fear dressed up as protection. And Liam, isolated and humbled, reaches a point where excuses no longer bring comfort. And in that solitude, he begins to understand that redemption, if it comes at all, will require patience, accountability, and a willingness to accept outcomes he cannot control. And though he longs to speak to hope, he gradually realizes that the most meaningful apology may be to respect her distance and focus on becoming someone worthy of trust, regardless of whether forgiveness ever arrives. And Steffi, observing this shift, finds herself torn between skepticism and cautious empathy, recognizing that while people can change, patterns do not disappear overnight. And this awareness strengthens her resolve to protect her own emotional boundaries, even as she acknowledges the shared history that still tugs at her heart. And as the wider fallout settles, the families involved begin to adjust to a new normal shaped by hard truths, rather than comfortable illusions, with conversations becoming more honest, if also more painful, and alliances shifting as individuals reassess where their loyalties truly lie. And for Hope, this period becomes a time of rebuilding not just emotionally, but spiritually, as she reconnects with the values that have always defined her: integrity, compassion, and self-respect. And these values guide her as she moves forward, reminding her that love should never require silence or self-betrayal. And as she looks toward an uncertain future, she does so with a quiet confidence, knowing that while the past cannot be undone, it can inform wiser choices, and that the canceled wedding, once seen as a devastating failure, has become a powerful turning point, a moment when truth interrupted tradition and forced growth in its wake. And as each character continues down their altered path, the echoes of that day remain, not as a source of endless pain, but as a reminder that honesty, though often delayed and difficult, has the power to dismantle illusions and create space for something real, something lasting. And in the ever-turbulent world of the bold and the beautiful, where passion and betrayal are constant companions, this chapter stands as a testament to the idea that the bravest love stories are not always the ones that end in marriage, but the ones that end in self-discovery, resilience, and the refusal to accept a future built on secrets. As the story continues to unfold, the final ripples of the canceled wedding linger like a quiet echo through every relationship it touched, reminding each character that a single moment of truth can alter the course of many lives. And for Hope, that echo becomes a source of resolve rather than regret, as she embraces the understanding that walking away was not a loss of love, but a reclamation of her voice. And this sense of empowerment subtly transforms how others see her, not as a woman abandoned at the altar, but as one who chose honesty over comfort, while Brooke, carrying the memory of her painful confession, finds solace in the knowledge that even the most devastating truths can become acts of protection when spoken with love. And Ridge, witnessing the strength that emerged from the fallout, begins to believe that perhaps this crisis has done what years of gentle advice never could, forcing growth through confrontation rather than avoidance. And Liam, standing at the edge of his own reckoning, finally understands that the future cannot be repaired by promises alone, only by sustained change and accountability, whether or not forgiveness ever comes. And as the families move forward, forever altered but strangely more grounded, the legacy of The Secret remains, not as a scandal, but as a lesson etched into their shared history, proving that in a world driven by passion and heartbreak, Truth, when finally spoken, has the power to break destructive cycles and open the door to a more honest tomorrow.